Hey everyone, and welcome to the Idiots Seeking Village podcast. My name is Rich, and along with my co-host Adam, we're going to try and tackle what's going on in our crazy and often dumb world. To kick things off, we wanted to tackle Texas and California, specifically the debate and the ideas around redistricting and representation, trying to understand what's actually at play, what's legal, what isn't, how these things work, and really what's at stake for all of us. And are the shenanigans going on now something that, we should expect, or are these things legal, illegal, and trying to get to the bottom of it?
Exciting topic right now.
Well, so what's going on here, right, is Republicans are pushing to kind of conduct what's an uncommon mid-decade redistricting, right? And with a pretty with a pretty blatant partisan goal to swing House seats ahead of the next year's midterms. Clearly, there's already some panic to swing those 3 to 5 seats in the House of Representatives. Polls show that Trump's numbers generally aren't popular. The economy is not improving. Immigration, obviously, very strong feelings on that one way or another. Seeing militarized police and militarized ICE agents everywhere is not particularly popular, generally speaking. Polls show that there's a pretty negative swing pre-election and post-election on these things. And Republicans looking ahead, right, and seeing that, hey, we're at risk of losing the House and want to make sure that we maintain control and get to continue to enact our agenda. And now where we're at right now is Democratic state lawmakers have fled the state to avoid a quorum so that no legal basis can happen to change the redistricting lines in Texas. I believe the vote was 86-5 by the remaining members to hunt down and arrest these runaway legislative members. And Adam, where are you at on this?
They all fled to Illinois, and Illinois is not going to help in any way to arrest them. I know Trump is trying to get the FBI to go find them also. It's just ridiculous. And now, California and Governor Newsom is looking to do the same. And it's going to just be a cascading effect of people losing more representation and losing more ability to be able to speak out. Like, it's just not going to stop. And it's just going to get worse and worse and more separated for no apparent reason other than Trump's will, because he's the one who told the governor of Texas to do this.
Well, yeah, I forget if it's the tail wagging the dog or not, right? I don't know if Trump told them to do it or the Republicans pushed ahead with this and he's behind, he's supporting it fully. I don't know necessarily that matters, right? But yeah, you've got California threatening to do the same. New York has brought up the same. Indiana, Florida, and Missouri are all discussing the same. The only other state we know that is going to do this is Ohio, because they've actually been running with a temporary map heading into last election cycle, and they legally need to approve an updated one. So that's that one, Ohio legislature is controlled by Republicans. So 1 to 2 potential seats are definitely going to shift in that direction in their favor. But I think it's worth noting, right? It's, you're bringing up the vote dilution, kind of moving around like that. It's funny. We don't do this very often. The last time it happened recently was Texas and Colorado did this in 2002. They ran in the election post-census and then immediately went and redrew the maps in their favor. So again, both Republican controlled houses, they shifted things in their favor at that time. And it's been over 20 years since that happened. So we think this is like really uncommon for us, but actually this used to happen a lot. Actually, pre Gilded Age and, kind of pre-war America, redistricting was actually super common, happened all the time. Anytime a party got into power, they immediately would go and redraw the district maps to benefit themselves.
Good to know that we have not grown up over all these years.
Yeah, no, we haven't changed in the least bit, right? Partisanship has always been a thing, and kind of cheating to win is just standard practice. And that's simply because we just don't actually have really, other than a couple of basic rules around this, like what you're supposed to do for redistricting. Right? So what do you know about that whole process?
I know very little other than what you just said, that whoever's in power does their best to alter that map as best they can to find the constituents that they want that will vote for them continuously. But I don't really know why we've never come up with a rules to like, okay, draw the map in a certain way or have it specifically population based by a certain amount of area distance from a certain location or anything like that. I've seen, I think this was why Ohio had to do it, because weren't they like really gerrymandering it before like crazy?
It was something like that, yeah. It was a map that got struck down legally,
that was it.
right? And they got struck down to something like immediately before the election, and so they didn't actually have time to get a new one through. So they basically ran with a temporary map of sorts just to get through the election process.
And this is not a new thing, because I remember in grade school history books of gerrymandering political cartoons of maps that looked obscenely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Where the lines would just go wherever they needed to go. And this day and age, it's completely unnecessary to strip people away from just being able to have their votes counted because it might affect your political future and career.
Yeah, no. So I think it's worth discussing why this is happening. And 'cause I think, I feel like I've heard of gerrymandering my whole life. And it's like, why does this shit happen? And you look at these maps, you go, who the hell drew this up? Like, what kind of...
Can they see?
Right, exactly. It's a blind kid drawing in the dark. And the funny thing is, actually, there is no federal level rule on this, effectively.
It's amazing that this country has lasted as long as it has with so few proper rules in place.
There's nothing in the Constitution effectively saying you need to district this way, or here's how you have to draw your maps. Essentially, you just need to be in alignment with the 14th Amendment, of the Equal Protection Clause, right? The idea is that each person's vote counts the same. And so what you need is each of the districts to have roughly the same number of people. And so your average House district right now has about 750,000 people, right? 750,000 or so people are in it. And that's really it. At the federal level, there's the Apportionment Act that was passed in 1842, which really required that House members be elected from a single district. So only one representative per district, which, changed a little bit of things here and there, right? You could have multi-member districts potentially prior to that, but essentially you need one person representing that single district. And they need to be in alignment with the Voting Rights Act. And so if you remember a couple of years ago, some of the pre-clearance things, like the post-Jim Crow elements were struck down around that. But right now, the relevant section is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which really is just saying that you can't dilute the voting strength of a racial or ethnic minority. Mm-hmm. And so pick one of those nice square states out west, and let's just say they have four reps, right? They have a population of 3 million divided by 3/4, right? That gets you to 4 reps. And let's just say a quarter of their population is, Black and Latino, right? It's a minority group. Now, if you draw those lines perfectly, one way you could have zero representation, right? You can dilute that representation among those minority groups.
Exactly.
You can also draw it the other way where, okay, they definitely, since they're a quarter of the population, right, and just 4 reps, you can say, well, they get one of the reps, and we draw the map that way, right, to overwhelmingly capture them, and then everyone else gets their own. That's kind of where it kind of goes back and forth. This is actually really complicated when you think about it, right? Because if you got to have the same number of people, and you want to make sure that everyone's vote counts, and you're not diluting the voting power of a single group, an interest group, it actually gets really complicated really fast. And when you think about how populations are concentrated in a state, you've pointed out to what we've been talking before, like 90% of the population of New York lives in this bottom part of the state.
Yeah, about 6% of the land.
It's something like 6% is the whole rest of the damn state. Now, then again, the Adirondacks is like the largest national park in the entire country. So it's a huge swath of wilderness, but still, right? Overwhelmingly, people live in a certain part. It is hard to draw, especially when you have disparate populations everywhere, a straight line. Right? That's part of why these are so weird.
Right.
But that said, it's not hard to kind of look at some of these and go, okay, well, I want to just subtly nudge the lines this way.
A couple blocks over.
And now I've taken 5% of this voting block that I don't really want to have representation and shifted it over to me, right? Or overwhelm it with some others.
It's so incredible that we have grown so little over the years that if it's a Black community or Hispanic community, that there's no vision here is that white people would not vote along the same lines as a Black community. or Hispanic community. And now it's why it's like a Democrat or a Republican instead of necessarily just white or black, because they're like, well, there's a lot of those white people there who might vote for them, especially in Austin, Texas right now. So they're like, well, let's make sure we could cut out regardless of what color is, but we're pretty sure they're blue. Let's get rid of them out of the picture so we can neutralize them. I'm fairly somewhat progressive, but I'm an independent. And so to think that like I can't go along with people of color to vote and they won't vote like I do. But I guess in other parts of the country, it's very, very different. And they have very different tastes, even though they really don't.
Yeah, well, I think, look, it doesn't, black, white, independent, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. People contain multitudes. And you can't just bucket folks into a particular classification and decide that's correct or that's all encompassing, right? I think more fundamentally, the problem is you look at racial gerrymandering and, kind of race-based districting and all this, and it's actually being argued right now, right? For years, it was struck down largely like, hey, you're discriminating against black people. Now the opposite argument is being made, like, hey, you're actually discriminating against white people by diluting their vote, by giving this power to these minority blocks. That's actually what's being challenged currently on the Supreme Court.
And I think that's the problem, is that these are going to be like federal decisions for the Supreme Court, but these issues, unfortunately, are more prone to red states than to blue states, where there are a lot more racial issues, it seems, than they are in the blue states.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. But there's plenty of people in blue states who are racist.
Of course, yes, but
you
it
and I
seems to be the problem, though.
You and I as white guys, the problem is often you could be standing next to a burning cross and people will be like, that's not racist. Right? So many will, especially around here, will say that. So you can't really say like it's more racist or less racist, in one way or another. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think it's worth looking at it. So like a lot of the rules and regulations around districting actually fall to the states overall. It's not, again, like I said, it's not really a federal thing. Like you have to do it this way. A lot of them have their own kind of rules around that, around fairness, partisan equity. Competitiveness is another one. You want registered Democrats and Republicans to be roughly equal in an area. So in theory, you actually have competitive races. There could be communities of interest, right? Again, so focusing on minority groups or kind of like underrepresented groups, like, hey, we want to make sure that they actually have a vote that counts ultimately around this. There are some that have compactness rules. So to your point about just stretching hundreds of miles, they have rules, but like, no, you got to kind of try to minimize the spread and the kind of, the zigzagging of these. There's some that have rules about incumbency and being neutral towards the incumbent. So you can't redistrict in favor of that person who's already in control of that seat and give them an unfair advantage. Conversely, also, you can't redistrict to really disadvantage that person and move their district hundreds of miles from where they live. Now suddenly make it difficult for them to run again for the seats. And there's some like California that have public input. So like Gavin Newsom is coming out there and he's talking about countermanding what Texas is doing. They've got to go through a whole process on their end. They actually they enacted an independent commission, like many states have, to ensure that there isn't a partisanship, that people aren't fucking with the lines in a partisan way. They're actually looking to kind of suspend that up until the next census so that they can respond to this. In New Jersey, same one, but they would have to go through, I believe, a constitutional amendment on their end, and they've already missed the deadline to do so for the next election. New York instituted a independent commission a few years ago to avoid these kind of problems, and now it's like, okay, we could change that, but it's not going to happen until 2028 election at the earliest in response.
I just don't know how much the red states clearly, if it was an arms race, would win. Because the blue states just have so much more they can redistrict to marginalize Republicans versus the red states.
Sorry, say they would win an arms race?
Yes. When it comes to redistricting, they have more that they can, they have more people they can marginalize than the blue states, as if it just went out of control, apparently.
Well, so that's the funny thing, right? If you actually, let's stick into Texas, right? It's in the news. They have about 18.5 million registered voters as of the time of the election. You okay?
I just thought I heard somebody screaming.
Yeah, there was someone screaming in it. deep background. It's probably our souls leaving our bodies to have this discussion.
That sounds about right.
So yeah, of the 18.5 million registered voters that they had going into the last election, do you know how many were Republican?
No.
Take a guess.
Out of the 18.5 million, 12 million.
6.6 million.
Almost said half, but no.
How many were registered Democrats?
Now I feel like you're tilting the ledge. So 4 million.
8 million.
Oh.
There are more registered Democrats than are registered Republicans in Texas. Registered Democrats make up nearly half of the voting base, and registered Republicans are only a little bit more than a third of the voting base in Texas.
Makes you wonder how it skews so heavily.
About 15% of voters are not registered with a political party. So that's about just under 30 million people, right? So you can easily toss that number onto the Republican pile, most likely.
What are there regulations for independent voters and stuff like that? Can they vote in primaries and things?
I don't
like
know
that?
if they have open primaries. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
I know New York doesn't. Obviously, that's where we live. But, every state has different rules around open versus closed primaries. I don't know how Texas does that. It'd actually be interesting to double check on that. But the funny thing is, right, Donald Trump got 6.4 million votes, just under 6.4. So roughly the number of registered Republicans. Kamala Harris got 4.8 million. So when you think about that,
Still a large number, even though it's...
Yeah, so it's just over 11 million votes out of 18.5 registered. It's actually one of the lowest voter turnout states in the nation. It's actually fifth lowest turnout during the election. Yeah. And I think to your point a little bit, right, in terms of low turnout, it's generally red states. Oklahoma, Arkansas, West Virginia, Texas, Mississippi, Tennessee are all comfortable red states and have some of the lowest turnouts. On that list also Hawaii, and then the next one is New York. Then it goes straight back to Indiana, Alabama, New Mexico, Louisiana, Wyoming, South Carolina, Kentucky. Then you get to California.
How many people don't vote there because they think, well, it's a done deal, I don't have to go out and vote?
I think that, I think, so Hawaii's obvious, right? Hawaii, it's an 8-hour difference, right? The shit's already buttoned up, right?
Yeah.
By the time people do it just because. It's more about local elections for them than anything else, right? It's not about the national elections. New York is just so Democratic that it's easy to be like, it's fine. We're going to, the Democrat is going to win anyway. So if you're a Democratic voter, you go, I don't need to show up. And if you're a Republican, generally speaking, you're not going to win
Well,
if you
it
try.
seems the same case with Texas most of the time. It's like, oh, this is going to be red. Why we shouldn't waste our dollars there for the most.
But looking at the registered numbers, you'd think otherwise, right? And this is where gerrymandering and vote suppression and all those things come into play.
I'm also wondering how many of those people have registered at one point in time and just haven't gotten back around to.
I don't know if you've met
changing
Texans, Adam. They don't like being called Democrats. They're not going to have that on their records, like as a mark.
I also
right?
don't know how. I don't obviously know many Texans, but I don't know how many are just gonna be like, I'm gonna go change that now.
I've been to Texas a bunch of times for work, and I've kind of lurked around some of the community forums and whatnot. There's a lot of claims that Texas is a purple state, and I think it's generally speaking, you can see that through the registration numbers, right? That people do not identify as Republicans, right? They very strongly identify as Democrats. Again, if you throw that entire pile of independent voters in a Republican one, it's they have a slight edge. It's more about making it difficult to vote, right? Going after communities and gerrymandering the hell out of it so that the vote doesn't matter and making it pointless. Voter intimidation and things like that go on.
You think at some point there'd be a turning point of numbers to slow that down? Because I was reading I think either was probably yesterday with the Attorney General of Texas is
Paxton.
Yes, he's trying to have now Beto O'Rourke arrested.
Oh, fun. What for?
Because he's accusing Beto of using his fund that he has, I don't know if they're a super PAC or what they consider themselves, using the money from it to help the Democrats who escaped, fly out of state, feed them.
Fund them, yeah.
And everything else that he can possibly do to take care of them. So that Cornine, who I think is the senator in Texas, is now also getting into this because Paxton and him don't like each other. So they're almost kind of out-trumping each other, trying to say this is terrible, this is illegal, and all these things. And I'm just like, Paxton is was impeached in Texas by the House there.
Yeah.
So that I was like, but the Senate, supported him just like Trump during his presidency. And it's just like, this guy's a known like criminal. He's like got a crime record. And they double down on this guy all the time and elect him. It's so, I don't know how much of it is Democrat, Republican, or a lot of the Democrats in Texas believe a certain way. Because I don't care if you're Republican, no matter how gerrymandered something is, these people do have values, and they still find a way to vote against those values.
Yeah, you can point that to a lot of things. It's like you care about this, you want that, and then you vote for the candidate who's not representing those interests at all. And I don't think we should get off on a tangent here, but you look at Trumpism, generally speaking, right? It's in a lot of ways, he might not be the best candidate for you, but at least he's trying to do something, or at least he says he's going to try to do something. And the others, the Democrats or, whoever aren't even offering a solution.
Right.
In a lot of situations, right? And so you kind of get to this point where people are just sick of the status quo and are willing to try anything just to get the change that we all feel that we need. Again, I feel like this is a little bit of a tangent to this conversation, getting us off track here.
I guess to slowly bring us back is that you would sooner support basically a guy who tried to rip you off and go along with that and what he thinks is right. So to me, it's like almost like what you believe is correct probably is not. And that there's something to this, what the Democrats are trying to do. I think it's ridiculous that they have to leave the state and not do their jobs. But the alternative is to allow the Republicans to do something that also is not right. And the person who's trying to prosecute this is basically a criminal who should have been put in jail.
Yeah. The problem, again, is there's no real federal mandates or rules around this. Actually, there's a Supreme Court case from 2019, Rucho versus Common Cause, that basically said that the Supreme Court, you cannot bring cases of partisan gerrymandering into the court. They're not, federal courts aren't going to do anything about it. They're like, it's a state's problem. So there really isn't a cohesive national set of rules around how you have to draw up lines.
Right.
And how you have to determine your representation. And so because of that, there's no federal limit on gerrymandering as a result. The states are free to largely do what they want. So it's not just, we're seeing this conversation right now of the arms race effectively around gerrymandering, and all these states are kind of piggybacking on, well, I'll do it, and I'll do it, and we'll look at this. There's no reason right now, legally, federally speaking, you can't redraw the lines every 2 years. There's no reason you cannot do that. You could use a computer to draw a maximum gerrymander that has just the weirdest shapes on your districts. That's totally fine. That is absolutely 100% legal. You could draw districts that don't connect, right? Non-continuous districts that, unite little bubbles of people in different parts of the state. Absolutely, totally fine to do that. It's not democratic. No one will look at that as reasonable, but totally legal, according to the Supreme Court right now. And like I said, there's a new court case kind of coming up, Louisiana versus Calais. As I said, there's a court case a few years ago, Shelby, that basically struck down Article 4 and 5, or invalidated Article 4 and 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which basically said, hey, these places that had Jim Crow laws and all this kind of, fuckery in the olden days, you have to get pre-approval before we okay your maps. They struck that down. And basically, the argument at the time was, well, these rules are 40 years old and they don't really apply anymore, these kind of racial mix calculations. So we're basically, until you update that, and they haven't updated it, you don't have to get pre-approval for all these areas. So now Calais is going actually after Section 2, which basically is saying you can't dilute the voting strength of a racial ethnic minority. It's the whole point of you can't bury that portion of your constituents into other groups and just be like, well, you're 5% of the population, well, you're represented 5% in your district, right? All's good and whatnot, because that's not how it works, because we have a first past the post single representative per district system that basically is winner take all at this point. So that's actually going at that right now. And, if that could get struck down. Some of the justices who dissented or even actually agreed with the last case on this were like, hey, we're only agreeing with this because of the narrow scope of this case, but we're open to discussing the broader implications of the Voting Rights Act. Now, if that goes through, holy crap, it's the Wild West. Then we're going to be able to redraw the maps constantly at all times to benefit whoever's in power without impunity. There's no laws around it. There's no rules.
And gosh forbid anybody should do things that are just morally right and correct. Now, how would this be influenced if we were to increase representation and increase the number of House representatives?
Right now, it would improve. It would change to an extent. Remember, by law, the House of Representatives is capped at 435 members. I don't remember what the law is. I didn't look it up.
I think it was enacted in the 1970s, I believe.
Yeah, it's pretty recent.
And what is it? What, like 750,000 basically? Or
that's just based on the population currently.
Per person?
That's the Reapportionment Act of 1929. Which capped it at 435 members. And then, temporarily got increased when Hawaii and Alaska were added.
Right.
And then kind of, they were redistricted, right, according to the next census and came back down. So you got to think about it, right? Our representatives covered about 200,000 people at the time.
Yeah.
Now it covers about 750,000. That's a more than threefold increase in the number of people represented. So if you were to remove that cap, you would see New York, California, a lot of blue states increase their representation. You'd also have populated states like Florida and Texas increase their representation, right? And places like Wyoming and Delaware would proportionally lose representation, right? So I think, to your point, it's about power. It's about control. The right thing to do is make sure that the House of Representatives is actually representative of the people.
Yes, it's in the name, people.
And it's in the goddamn name. That's the whole point of it. But we're artificially lowering the number of people. I mean, just using that rough math, right? 200,000 to 700,000, you should be looking at a House of Representatives that's over 1,200 reps.
I mean,
or something like that.
I think if they just added 100, I think it would probably bring it down to like maybe 500,000 or so, which is I think 20 or 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. But come on, we can't lose to the United Kingdom, Japan, and China. I mean, not China, Germany. They have better representation than us. We're supposed to be the kings of democracy.
It's funny. Yeah, parliamentary democracy operates differently.
Right.
Right. They don't have districts the same way we do. They also vote for a party, essentially, and then they have reps from the party who basically take the seat. It's a little bit different, but they also have first past the post voting in a lot of those places, and so you don't get proportional representation. Right. I think the real problem here, fundamentally, and the way to address all this, that in a nonpartisan way, in actually an anti-partisan way, right? Not bipartisan, not neutral, anti-partisan way, is you have to remove the cap on the House of Representatives, let it actually be representative of the people. Mm-hmm. And what you need to do is you need to eliminate first past the post voting. You could still have a single rep represent an area, but it's got to be proportional to the votes that actually happen. So just because, let's just take our area. It's actually a very close split, right? Our whole district leans slightly left, even though it doesn't seem that, slightly red, even though it doesn't seem that way. But it's within 2 to 3 percentage points in either direction, right, for these national elections. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that you shouldn't have a representation in Congress shouldn't be more 55-45 or 52-48. Right, as the elections actually end up happening. As it is currently, that whole 48, 45, whoever comes in second place doesn't get represented.
No.
And also, currently, you don't need to win a majority, right? You see that come up ever since Bush and Gore in 2000. People talking about hey, these people won the presidency. They didn't even win the majority of the votes.
Yeah.
Right, and it's happened, 3-4 times since then? I believe both Trump and both Bushes? Maybe
times for Bush.
It's at least one. Okay. It's happened 3 or 4 times since then. We need proportional representation. We need representation that actually represents the number of people. Yeah. And it needs to be done in a nonpartisan manner, right? It needs to be done in a way that actually allows people's voices to be heard. Because I think that's a lot of the frustration, right? Is that our reps don't represent us.
No.
And when you have kind of this echo chamber world where positions are moving further and further apart, right? There's no common ground for people to work on.
And that's the thing, is that I don't even think we are moving further and further apart. Always, every election, everything. The most important things are economy and healthcare. Everything else is distant to the bottom. But somehow the only thing that rises up on TV and your social media is social issues that almost very rarely affect you in any way that matter. That doesn't matter. We don't care, most of these people. Do you really care what people are doing in their houses? As long as it's not affecting you or hurting you? No. But you do care about being able to pay for your home, eat. If you break something, you might not go bankrupt. Those are the things that I would think we all care about. But somehow it gets boiled down to like nothing. And that's cast aside for more social issues.
Yeah, no, that's more of a function of the media landscape, right? I mean, think about what you heard about leading up into the election. You constantly heard about inflation. Now, inflation continues to grow. It's over 3.1% annualized. It went up another third of a percentage point in July. Yet, it's not being hammered on in the mainstream media, right? In the way that it was leading up to the election. You don't hear about crime the same way you did leading up to the election because crime is at 30-year lows.
Oh, not according to Trump.
Yeah, well, not according to now they're kind of bringing back that playbook, right? Oh my God, crime is up so much. I remember I had coworkers who were, about like, subway crime as we were starting to do a return to office. I'm like, yeah, crime's up 20% because you had 70% fewer people. Now you have all these people back. And yeah, it blips up a little bit, but not in proportion to where it was, right? You got to ignore kind of the short-term blip and look at the long-term trend. Long-term trend is down, right? But it's easy to sensationalize, one high-profile, attack, right? And ignore kind of the broader picture.
Yeah, no,
and kind of get
100%.
your narrative going.
And they've made sure that, DC can't be properly represented. I think Trump said recently that about DC wanting to become a state and allowing them to become a state. And he said, no way, because that would be 2 blue senators and that can't be allowed.
The same reason that, Puerto Rico doesn't get statehood.
Right.
And all those other places. We've become so entrenched in our ways, right? It's you look at the Constitution and we're like, oh my God, you got to honor what the Founding Fathers did. The Founding Fathers wrote a living document. And we've had, over 30 amendments that I can recall, kind of off the top of my head. We make changes when we need to, but it's become such an issue at this point. I think what this is really leading up to, right, and this is why redistricting, representation matter, and this is why we're having this conversation, is there's been a quiet push for a few years for a constitutional convention, a national constitutional convention. And this is kind of the long ground game that you're seeing being played, is ultimately constitutional convention, who gets to speak on those, who gets an input, is the state legislatures, right? The states themselves. So they want to make it as partisan as possible, as entrenched as possible, so that one party versus another gets a lion's share of of what goes into a new constitution on this. And I think that's really, it's not so much right now. I think the short game, right, that people look at is, they're trying to take the House of Representatives, right? They're trying to keep Trump in control and all this and kind of the next, 2 to 4 years. Remember, the guy's 79 fucking years old.
Yeah.
I mean, he might have keeled over dead while we were speaking, right? It's you look at, fascist regimes, right, over the years. They all last 30, 50 years, but with the same leader at the helm, right? No one comes in as an 80-year-old. And lasts, right? So you're going to see changes. And they know this. Trump is a means to an end.
Correct.
For the people at the Heritage Foundation,
yes,
right? For the
100%.
Koch brothers, for all these people at the Federalist Society who want to reimagine the way that America is. And they're looking at this as almost accelerationist, right? Kick it up a notch, get the power, then push for the Constitutional Convention. Then these states that are now firmly in their control get the input and start to enact some of the rules that they want to see, right? It's not so much anymore that they're attacking the courts, that they're ignoring the courts, that they're just undoing law just because they feel like it. It's about long-term control. And I think that's where we're going to see this kind of play out over the long term. And ultimately, we do need a constitutional convention. I think we do. It needs to be really freaking, again, anti-partisan, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be How would you want to live in this country if you didn't know which side of the equation you were going to end up on when these rules go into effect? That's the only fair way to do it. And it's the only egalitarian way, right? You really believe in, freedom. You believe in democracy, right? You believe in all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of property. You've got to have the rules around that support that.
Yep. And you can't have one party write those rules.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just be like one group is dictating how those rules are happening. It's got to be in a way that's open-minded, right? That's open-ended.
Well, then maybe we need to have rules written and the people actually get to vote on those rules and not the people who vote for those rules.
I think we need to start by addressing how voting happens, right? How does the representation happen? I think it's got to be proportional. I think, if 5% of people vote for a Nazi and 5% vote for a communist, you need 5% representation of communists and Nazis, right? Both, within our representative bodies. There's no, you might not like that because of one or the other word that I just said,
right?
But it's the only way to go about it that doesn't result in a power grab.
But now how do you take away the power from the two primary people who would rather die than give that up?
That's the problem. I said it before this last election. The best thing for this country would be for both Trump and Biden to just step down from the race, right? To both go take a look, stand back and go, this shit is crazy. And it's because of me. It's like this. I'm stepping out. I'm out. That would have been that. I mean, that's a fantasy world, right?
Right. Because it's not this way.
But they're seeking power. They're both actively seeking power for one means or another.
Right. Because, he's seeking it the way it is because he is seeking it. Mm-hmm. It's like if he was out of the equation, we'd probably be just maybe 10 or 15 years behind where we are now.
Like what's the old saying is, the people who seek power are the ones you shouldn't have in power, right? And that's the problem is right now is the most qualified people in this country to run the country are like, I don't want anything to do with that, right? That's insanity.
Yeah.
Get me out of there.
And it's overwhelming because, like you said, to have proportional voting, you're going against the tide, and you're trying to say, okay, well, this makes sense that I could be represented finally. However, I have to tackle Mount Everest right now.
Yeah.
Do I have to do this by myself? Who's going to help me tackle this? And it's daunting.
It is.
It's like going into a hoarder's house. Where the fuck do I start?
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. So you're like, okay, these are my best options. I mean, I remember the first time I voted, I just turned 18, and it was this is how really old I am. It was Clinton Dole.
Okay.
And I remember before voting, I was like, I'm trying to think about who I'm picking and why am I picking them. And like, you just got to vote for the lesser of two evils. And like 30 years later, I'm still voting for the lesser of two evils. This can't be our only option. This can't be our only choice.
Yeah. We deserve better representation. We deserve better governance. And we don't get it, right? And
but
because
don't we get what we deserve sometimes?
Sometimes we get what we deserve. I'm not going to argue with that one. There's plenty of things you and I can dive into to peel that onion back a little bit. But, if we really care about this country, it's not about letting one side or another win. It's about letting us, win as people, right? And having 100%. Our voices heard and ourselves being represented. I mean, I would much rather see a direct democracy and to put every single politician out of work. Just remove representatives altogether and just let us vote directly on the issues that come up.
And who would execute those issues for us?
You have people who are caretakers who go in on a set term just to execute the will of the people and then walk away. No campaigning, no lobbying around these things. It's strictly, hey, people voted on this. We have a job to kind of get it implemented and done. And there it goes. The accountability is to us as voters to stay informed and to vote our will, right? And it should be the job of the representatives who go in to
execute that for us.
To execute that will. As it is, think about it this way. Going back to our conversation about removing the cap on the House of Representatives and kind of increasing it from 435 as it currently is. Think about how easy it is for someone to go in knowing, okay, 435, half of that is 218. If I want to buy votes to go a certain way, I have to only bribe 218 people. Because let's be honest about what lobbying and all this is. It's bribery. It's legalized bribery, right? Yeah. We've acknowledged that money talks, and we allow money to talk in specific ways, right? But because we've limited Congress artificially in size, and diluted our votes, it is much easier for someone who wants to implement legislation to buy 218 votes than it is to buy 600, 700, 800 votes.
Absolutely.
It's a lot cheaper.
Oh yeah.
Right? A lot cheaper, a lot easier to get that to happen. And that's hurting us actively. And we're seeing that progressively more and more. The country's growing. There's more people, and our voices count less and less. And I think that's a big part of why people are angry, right? We're increasingly realizing it's all fluff. And none of what we say matters. None of what we do matters. The outcomes don't really change, and they don't ever change in our favor. Yeah. At this point, right?
Because we have the changes that we want, and I think the majority of people want. You would have to then vote for somebody who then has to go against what is best for them in order to enact those changes. Even though they're like those congressmen or whatever, like, why do I want to change these things? You know how well I've done?
Why would a congressperson who makes a nice fat salary, right? It's what, $174,000 a year to be a congressperson at this point, and has insider information that they can legally trade on, right? Because they have the committees and are allowed to basically make decisions that influence stock prices, and they're legally allowed to trade on that. And then when they get out of politics, or they're voted out, or they choose to leave, they have lucrative speaking engagements, they have lucrative lobby jobs, right? And they're allowed to get jobs with the organizations for whom they passed good, beneficial legislation for.
Sure.
Why would they vote against their own interests, their personal interests, right? Their benefit. It's that conversation of you can't change someone's mind when their paycheck depends on not seeing your point of view.
Yeah, that's why it's so hard, to take money out of politics when the politician is the one who want it there, because that's how they get rich. Because clearly we need to have it where, like, congressmen, I don't agree with the only 2 years they're in power for, just because it's like you get elected and then you're immediately starting to run again, and you have your hands out again because this is going to cost a lot of money to run.
Right.
Give them 4 years or 3 years, but they got to have term limits. Stop them from being there forever, and just slowly build that up where there's enough turnover where you can have people who are like, you know what, we do need more representation. We should increase the amount of representatives. We should have better forms of voting than we have now, and slowly eat away at that. Otherwise, it's just going to fall apart at one time, and then we're going to...
It's spiraling out of control currently. Again, the problem is, how do you chip away at any one of these things? Because you need multiple things to happen, right? You need multiple points. And again, the entire system is predicated on not changing anything, right? Keeping power and money exactly where it is as it currently stands. That's why I actually I'm in favor of that constitutional convention, right? Because we need to fundamentally change these things, but we cannot have partisan hacks and party apparatchiks running that and deciding, okay, these are the things we're going to do. We need to have, I don't know, constitutional law scholars. I don't know, someone, right, coming in and just putting in the proper framework to address these things independently in a way that's not going to, that's going to be bad for the people in power and good for us on the ground.
I think we forget that we are the boss of these politicians, and that it's really our job to manage them. Just like if you were a boss at any company, you have to manage your employees. You can't just hire them and sit at home, let them do what they want, and get mad when they screw shit up. They like to try to pretend that we work for them. I think they need some reminding that it's the other way around. And as long as we still have the right to vote, we must use it and make it mean something. The gerrymandering we talked about today really only means anything if you let them have their way. They only gerrymander based on how you've registered to vote as a Republican or Democrat. But once you go into that voting booth, you can vote however you want. So go out there and vote for a candidate you want and not just one that blows smoke up your ass. When you are willing to cross those party lines, you are going to turn this system on its head and show them it's not business as usual. The boss is now in the office, and that's you. That's us. And we can't forget that.
It is. Fundamentally, the problem is the way life works currently is it's faster and easier to work to make enough money that problems don't apply to you than it is to actually fix the problems. And we need to change those incentives, right? We need to change that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. I just hope I'm alive to see that.
Me too, buddy. Me too. All right, let's wrap this up. It's been a good chat. Any last thoughts, Adam?
We have a lot of work to do. Not just us, but all of us to correct things.
I agree. All right, friends, we'll catch you later.
Idiots Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.